When Clash of the Titans arrived in 2010, it brought together an impressive ensemble of established stars, respected character actors, and rising talents. Directed by Louis Leterrier, the film was a modern reimagining of the 1981 fantasy classic, introducing Greek mythology to a new generation through large-scale visual effects and blockbuster action. While the film itself divided critics, its cast remained one of its greatest strengths. Each actor contributed experience, charisma, and a unique interpretation of characters rooted in ancient mythology, helping elevate the story beyond its visual spectacle. Leading the cast was Sam Worthington as Perseus, the demigod hero destined to confront terrifying monsters and challenge the will of the gods themselves. Worthington had become one of Hollywood's fastest-rising stars after appearing in Avatar only a few months before Clash of the Titans premiered. James Cameron's groundbreaking science fiction epic had transformed him into an international star, making him one of the industry's most recognizable leading men almost overnight. Before Avatar, Worthington had built a solid reputation in Australian cinema through films such as Somersault and Macbeth, where he demonstrated both dramatic intensity and physical commitment. His breakthrough in Hollywood also included Terminator Salvation, released in 2009, further establishing him as an action hero capable of leading major franchises. In Clash of the Titans, Worthington portrayed Perseus as a reluctant hero rather than a confident warrior. Instead of embracing his divine heritage immediately, his character struggles with anger toward the gods following the tragic death of his adoptive family. Worthington's grounded and emotionally restrained performance helped make Perseus feel more human than mythical, emphasizing determination and resilience over arrogance or supernatural confidence. Although some critics believed the script limited the emotional depth of the character, Worthington's physical presence and believable action performance made him a convincing centerpiece for the film. Playing Zeus was Liam Neeson, already regarded as one of the most respected actors of his generation. By 2010, Neeson had enjoyed an extraordinary career spanning decades. His performances in Schindler's List, Michael Collins, Rob Roy, Batman Begins, and Kingdom of Heaven had demonstrated his versatility across historical drama, action, fantasy, and prestige cinema. However, Taken, released in 2008, unexpectedly reinvented him as one of Hollywood's premier action stars despite being in his mid-50s. Audiences embraced his commanding screen presence, calm authority, and ability to portray determined, powerful figures. As Zeus, Neeson brought immense gravitas to the ruler of Mount Olympus. His deep voice, commanding posture, and regal demeanor perfectly suited the king of the gods. Although his screen time was relatively limited compared to the film's central adventure, every appearance reinforced Zeus as a figure of overwhelming power and complicated responsibility. Neeson's natural authority helped sell the mythology even when the dialogue leaned toward exposition. Opposite Neeson stood Ralph Fiennes as Hades, the god of the underworld and the film's primary antagonist. Fiennes had already established himself as one of Britain's finest actors through performances in Schindler's List, The English Patient, Red Dragon, The Constant Gardener, and especially as Lord Voldemort throughout the Harry Potter series. Known for portraying intelligent, emotionally layered villains, Fiennes possessed an unmatched ability to communicate menace through subtle facial expressions and vocal delivery. His version of Hades departed significantly from the more restrained interpretations seen in earlier mythology adaptations. Instead, Fiennes portrayed him almost like a supernatural force of decay, with smoke-like visual effects surrounding his body and an ever-present sense of corruption. His performance balanced theatrical intensity with genuine emotional bitterness, presenting Hades not simply as evil but as a god consumed by centuries of resentment toward both Zeus and humanity. Even critics who disliked elements of the screenplay frequently praised Fiennes for bringing energy and complexity to the villain. Gemma Arterton portrayed Io, a mysterious immortal woman who guides Perseus throughout his journey. Arterton had quickly become one of Britain's rising stars after appearing in St. Trinian's, Quantum of Solace, and Rock'n'Roller. Her blend of elegance, intelligence, and quiet confidence made her particularly effective in fantasy and historical settings. Rather than portraying Io as a helpless romantic interest, Arterton emphasized wisdom, patience, and emotional strength. She served as Perseus's mentor, protector, and emotional anchor during his transformation from fisherman to legendary hero. Although the film significantly altered Io compared to her mythological origins, Arterton gave the character warmth and dignity, helping audiences connect with the story's emotional core. Her chemistry with Worthington also provided moments of calm between the large-scale action sequences. Mads Mikkelsen appeared as Draco, the experienced military commander leading the expedition alongside Perseus. At the time, Mikkelsen was already well known throughout Europe for films including Pusher, Open Hearts, After the Wedding, and Casino Royale, where he played the unforgettable Bond villain Le Chiffre. His ability to portray disciplined, morally complex warriors made him an ideal choice for Draco. Rather than overshadowing the younger hero, Mikkelsen created a veteran soldier whose experience complemented Perseus's inexperience. Draco gradually comes to respect Perseus despite initially viewing him as merely another recruit. The character's leadership, loyalty, and willingness to sacrifice himself added emotional weight to the group's dangerous journey. Mikkelsen's understated performance stood out because he avoided excessive heroics, instead portraying a realistic commander who inspired respect through competence rather than speeches. Alexa Davalos played Andromeda, the princess whose fate drives much of the central conflict. Before joining the production, Davalos had appeared in the Chronicles of Riddick, Feast of Love, and Defiance. Clash of the Titans arrived in theaters in 2010 during a period when Hollywood had rediscovered its fascination with mythology, fantasy, and ancient civilizations. Audiences had already embraced historical epics such as Gladiator, Troy, and 300, while fantasy franchises like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter had demonstrated that stories filled with mythical creatures and legendary heroes could dominate the global box office. Into this environment came Clash of the Titans, a modern reimagining of the beloved 1981 fantasy adventure. Although the film received mixed reviews from critics, it became a commercial success and played an important role in shaping the wave of mythological action films that followed throughout the early 2010s. One of the film's greatest cultural contributions was introducing Greek mythology to a younger generation that may never have watched the original movie. While the ancient myths had remained part of school curricula and literature for centuries, modern audiences often encountered these stories through films, television series, and video games rather than classical texts. Clash of the Titans transformed legendary figures such as Perseus, Zeus, Hades, Medusa, Pegasus, and the Kraken into blockbuster entertainment, encouraging many viewers to become interested in the original myths behind the characters. The film did not attempt to present mythology exactly as it appeared in ancient Greek literature. Instead, it adapted the stories to fit modern blockbuster storytelling, emphasizing action, fast pacing, spectacular visual effects, and heroic character arcs. Although mythology enthusiasts often criticized these changes, the movie succeeded in making ancient legends accessible to audiences unfamiliar with classical history. For many younger viewers, Clash of the Titans became their first introduction to Greek mythology, inspiring curiosity about the original legends that had influenced Western literature and culture for thousands of years. Another significant aspect of the film's cultural impact was its contribution to Hollywood's renewed interest in ancient civilizations. During the years surrounding its release, studios invested heavily in stories based on mythology and historical fantasy. Films such as Immortals, Wrath of the Titans, Hercules, and Gods of Egypt all arrived within a relatively short period, attempting to combine ancient legends with modern visual effects technology. While each approached mythology differently, Clash of the Titans demonstrated that audiences were still willing to support large-scale fantasy adventures centered on legendary heroes and gods. The film also reflected changing trends within action cinema. During the late 2000s and early 2010s, audiences increasingly expected action movies to feature enormous computer-generated environments, massive creatures, and spectacular battles impossible to achieve using practical effects alone. Clash of the Titans embraced this philosophy completely. Giant scorpions, winged beasts, Medusa, the Kraken, and the cities of ancient Greece were all created through extensive digital visual effects. The movie represented Hollywood's growing confidence in combining live-action performances with entirely computer-generated worlds, a trend that would continue expanding throughout the following decade. One of the film's most recognizable cultural contributions involved the Kraken itself. Interestingly, the Kraken is not actually part of traditional Greek mythology. The creature originates from Scandinavian folklore, Yet the original 1981 film had popularized its inclusion in the Perseus story. The 2010 remake continued this interpretation, introducing the massive sea monster to an entirely new audience. As a result, many casual moviegoers came to associate the Kraken with Greek mythology, despite its historical origins belonging elsewhere. This demonstrates how influential popular culture can become in reshaping public understanding of ancient legends. Perhaps the single most enduring piece of pop culture connected to Clash of the Titans is the phrase "release the Kraken." Although the line originated in the 1981 version, the 2010 remake reintroduced it to millions of viewers worldwide. Liam Neeson's powerful delivery as Zeus transformed the phrase into one of the most memorable moments in the film. Almost immediately, it spread far beyond cinema. Television shows, internet videos, sporting events, political cartoons, advertisements, and countless social media posts began using "release the Kraken" as a humorous expression meaning to unleash overwhelming force or allow something powerful to begin. The phrase quickly evolved into an internet meme. Sports fans would post it before important matches when a star player entered the field. Gamers used it before launching powerful attacks in online games. Businesses occasionally incorporated it into marketing campaigns whenever unveiling new products. Even years after the film's release, "Release the Kraken" remained instantly recognizable, demonstrating how a single line of dialogue can enter everyday popular culture. The movie also contributed to renewed interest in mythological monsters across entertainment media. Following its release, creatures such as Medusa, giant scorpions, harpies, Pegasus, and the Kraken appeared more frequently in video games, comic books, fantasy novels, and animated series. While these monsters had always existed within mythology, modern visual effects gave filmmakers the ability to present them on an unprecedented scale. The terrifying Medusa sequence, in particular, became one of the film's most praised moments, inspiring comparisons to horror cinema while reminding audiences why the Gorgon remains one of mythology's most enduring monsters. Video games also reflected the growing popularity of mythological action during this period. Franchises centered on ancient legends experienced increased attention as audiences sought experiences similar to what they had seen in theaters. The broader entertainment industry recognized that mythology offered endless opportunities for epic storytelling, memorable creatures, supernatural powers, and heroic adventures that appealed to both younger and older audiences. Bringing Clash of the Titans to the big screen in 2010 was an ambitious undertaking that combined modern filmmaking technology with one of the oldest stories in human history. The original 1981 film had become famous for its groundbreaking stop-motion effects created by legendary visual effects artist Ray Harryhausen. Rather than attempting to recreate those techniques, the filmmakers chose to embrace the latest digital technology available, transforming Perseus' legendary adventure into a modern visual spectacle. Behind every monster, battle, and mythical landscape was a production that required years of planning, international collaboration, and countless creative decisions. The project was directed by Louis Leterrier, a French filmmaker who had already demonstrated his talent for fast-paced action films through The Transporter, Unleashed, and The Incredible Hulk. Leterrier had developed a reputation for energetic camera work, dynamic action choreography, and visually ambitious storytelling. When Warner Brothers selected him to direct Clash of the Titans, the studio wanted someone capable of delivering an exciting fantasy adventure that would appeal to modern blockbuster audiences rather than simply recreating the original film scene by scene. From the beginning, Leterrier made it clear that he respected the 1981 classic while wanting to create something new. Instead of copying every character or creature exactly as audiences remembered them, he aimed to reimagine Greek mythology with greater realism, darker visuals, and more grounded action. He wanted the gods to appear majestic but intimidating, the monsters terrifying rather than whimsical, and the human characters to feel vulnerable despite the epic scale surrounding them. One of the earliest creative decisions involved redesigning nearly every creature from scratch. The visual effects team studied ancient artwork, mythology, and modern creature design before creating updated versions of Medusa, Pegasus, the giant scorpions, harpies, Jinn, and the Kraken. Every monster went through dozens of concept paintings and digital models before a final design was approved. The goal was to make each creature feel like it could genuinely exist within this dangerous mythical world instead of appearing as simple fantasy creations. Principal photography began in 2009 and took place across several countries. Wales became one of the production's most important filming locations. Its dramatic mountains, rocky coastlines, waterfalls, and rugged landscapes provided natural environments that perfectly represented the ancient world. Instead of relying entirely on computer-generated backgrounds, the filmmakers wanted real locations whenever possible to give the adventure greater authenticity. Many of Perseus' journeys across cliffs, valleys, and open landscapes were filmed in the Welsh countryside. The production frequently had to transport hundreds of crew members, large camera equipment, horses, costumes, and props into remote areas where weather conditions could change rapidly. Rain, strong winds, and cold temperatures sometimes delayed filming, but the unpredictable weather also added dramatic skies and natural atmosphere that enhanced many scenes. Additional filming took place in Ethiopia, where the vast deserts and rocky terrain provided locations suitable for the dangerous wastelands crossed by Perseus and his companions. These environments helped create the feeling that the heroes were traveling through a harsh and unforgiving world filled with mythical dangers waiting around every corner. Several sequences were also completed on large sound stages where elaborate sets could be built. Massive temple interiors, sections of Argos, Hades' underworld environments, and various palace scenes required detailed construction rather than location shooting. Set designers combined classical Greek architectural inspiration with fantasy elements to create locations that felt ancient while still belonging to a mythological universe. One of the production's biggest technical challenges involved balancing practical filmmaking with digital effects. Louis Leterrier strongly preferred giving actors physical environments whenever possible. Large rock formations, temple ruins, giant statues, and practical props were constructed so performers had something tangible to interact with during filming. These practical elements were later expanded digitally to create much larger environments. Sam Worthington performed many of his own physical action scenes throughout production. Having recently completed Avatar and Terminator Salvation, he was already accustomed to physically demanding roles. Extensive sword training, shield work, climbing exercises, and combat rehearsals became part of his daily preparation. Worthington wanted Perseus to move like someone who had grown up as a fisherman rather than a perfectly trained royal warrior. His fighting style intentionally appeared rougher and more instinctive than the disciplined soldiers surrounding him. The actors portraying Perseus' companions also underwent military-style training before filming began. Since their characters were experienced soldiers, the cast practiced marching formations, sword fighting, shield coordination, and horseback riding together. This preparation helped create believable teamwork during battle scenes, making the expedition feel like an experienced military unit instead of individual actors performing separately. Clash of the Titans follows one of the oldest heroic journeys in Western mythology, but adapts it into a fast-paced modern action-adventure centered on revenge, destiny, and the relationship between humanity and the gods. Rather than presenting Perseus as a flawless mythical champion from the beginning, the film introduces him as an ordinary fisherman who gradually discovers his extraordinary heritage. The narrative combines elements of classical mythology with contemporary blockbuster storytelling, moving from personal tragedy to epic adventure before culminating in a confrontation that determines the fate of both humans and gods. The story opens by establishing the ancient world and the uneasy balance between mankind and the Olympian gods. Humans once worshipped the gods faithfully, providing them with prayers that strengthened their divine power. However, over time humanity has become increasingly independent, arrogant, and resentful. Many cities begin rejecting the gods' authority, believing they no longer need divine protection or guidance. This conflict between mortals and immortals immediately establishes one of the film's central narrative tensions and provides the motivation for nearly every major character. The opening sequence also introduces Perseus, who has grown up believing he is the son of a humble fisherman named Speros. Living peacefully with his adoptive family, Perseus has no knowledge of his true origins or the destiny awaiting him. These early scenes intentionally emphasize simplicity and normality. The audience sees a man who values family, hard work, and loyalty rather than power or glory. This quiet introduction makes the tragedy that follows far more emotionally effective. The first major turning point occurs when Hades attacks without warning. During a confrontation between humans and the gods, Hades unleashes devastating destruction that destroys Perseus' fishing boat and kills his adoptive family. This moment serves as the emotional catalyst for the entire story. Perseus survives, but everything that gave his life meaning is taken from him within moments. His grief transforms into anger, not only toward Hades but toward all the gods, whom he blames for treating human lives as insignificant. Soon afterward, Perseus is brought before King Zeus and Queen Cassiopeia in the city of Argos. Here the audience learns that Princess Andromeda has been declared more beautiful than the goddess Aphrodite, an act of arrogance that further angers Olympus. Hades appears before the royal court, delivering Zeus' terrifying ultimatum. Unless Andromeda is sacrificed to the Kraken within 10 days, the monstrous creature will destroy the entire city. This introduces the story's primary external conflict and establishes the deadline that drives the remainder of the narrative. At this point, another important revelation changes Perseus' understanding of himself. Zeus reveals that Perseus is actually his son, making him a demigod with extraordinary potential. Rather than accepting this revelation with pride, Perseus rejects his divine heritage. His hatred for the gods remains stronger than any desire to embrace their power. This internal conflict becomes one of the film's defining character arcs. Throughout the story, Perseus must decide whether to accept the gifts of Olympus or rely solely on his humanity. The narrative then shifts into the classic adventure structure. Perseus joins a military expedition led by Draco, an experienced commander tasked with finding a way to defeat the Kraken before it reaches Argos. The journey transforms the film from palace drama into a traveling adventure, allowing the heroes to encounter various mythical creatures and increasingly dangerous obstacles. Each challenge serves both as an action sequence and as an opportunity for Perseus to grow into his role as a leader. One of the first major encounters introduces the Jinn, mysterious desert warriors possessing unusual abilities and a deep understanding of the supernatural world. Initially appearing as enemies, the Jinn eventually become valuable allies. Their inclusion broadens the mythology beyond the Olympian gods and reinforces the idea that the world contains many ancient mysteries beyond human understanding. These scenes also provide moments of reflection between battles, allowing characters to discuss destiny, mortality, and sacrifice. The pace accelerates dramatically during the battle against the giant scorpions. This sequence represents the first true test of Perseus' leadership under extreme pressure. The creatures emerge unexpectedly from the desert, attacking with overwhelming speed and power. Several soldiers are killed during the battle, reminding viewers that victory comes at a significant cost. Rather than presenting action without consequences, the film consistently demonstrates that every encounter weakens the expedition and increases the urgency of their mission. Following the Scorpion battle, the survivors seek guidance from the Stygian witches. These eerie figures share a single magical eye that allows them to see the future. Their scenes introduce mystery and suspense while providing the heroes with crucial information. The witches reveal that Medusa possesses the only weapon capable of defeating the Kraken. Her severed head retains the power to turn living creatures into stone, making it the expedition's only hope for saving Argos. This revelation marks the midpoint of the narrative. The story shifts from simply surviving the journey to pursuing a specific objective. Rather than wandering through mythological landscapes without direction, Perseus and his companions now have a clearly defined destination and purpose. The mission becomes more dangerous because success depends upon defeating one of mythology's most feared monsters. The Medusa sequence forms the dramatic centerpiece of the entire film. Entering the abandoned temple where she resides, the remaining soldiers quickly discover that brute strength alone cannot defeat her. Medusa hunts through shadows, using silence, patience, and fear rather than overwhelming force. The confined setting contrasts sharply with the open landscapes featured earlier, creating an atmosphere resembling psychological horror more than traditional fantasy action. Although Clash of the Titans is remembered primarily for its spectacular action sequences, giant monsters, and large-scale visual effects, beneath its adventure lies a story that explores several timeless themes. Like the ancient Greek myths that inspired it, The film examines humanity's relationship with power, the consequences of pride, the meaning of destiny, the struggle between free will and fate, the importance of sacrifice, and the search for personal identity. While the movie presents these ideas through blockbuster entertainment, they remain central to understanding why the story of Perseus has endured for thousands of years. Perhaps the film's most significant theme is the conflict between humanity and the gods. From the opening scenes, the relationship between mortals and Olympus is portrayed as increasingly fragile. The gods depend upon human prayers for their strength, while humans have grown tired of living in fear of divine punishment. This creates an unusual power struggle. Instead of presenting the gods as completely independent beings, the film suggests that even divine rulers require the belief and loyalty of ordinary people. This idea transforms the conflict into more than simply good versus evil. Neither side is entirely innocent. Humanity has become arrogant, believing it no longer needs the gods, while the gods have become proud, expecting obedience simply because of their immense power. Zeus struggles to maintain balance between these opposing forces, while Hades seeks to exploit the growing resentment for his own revenge. The result is a complex relationship built upon dependence, fear, respect, and rebellion rather than simple domination. Closely connected to this is the theme of pride. Throughout Greek mythology, excessive pride often leads to destruction, and Clash of the Titans continues this tradition. Queen Cassiopeia's boast that her daughter Andromeda is more beautiful than the gods immediately provokes divine anger. Her words are not merely seen as vanity but as an insult to Olympus itself. The punishment that follows demonstrates one of mythology's oldest lessons. Arrogance often carries consequences far greater than those who display it can imagine. However, the film expands this idea beyond individual characters. Entire cities display pride by openly defying the gods, believing themselves untouchable. Likewise, Hades allows his own pride and bitterness to consume him, preventing reconciliation with Zeus. Even Zeus himself struggles with pride, believing he can maintain order through displays of overwhelming power. Nearly every major conflict in the story originates from someone placing personal pride above wisdom or compassion. Another major theme is destiny versus free will. Perseus is born with a destiny he never requested. As the son of Zeus, everyone expects him to become a legendary hero who accepts divine gifts and fulfills an ancient prophecy. Yet Perseus repeatedly rejects this expectation. He refuses powerful weapons, questions the guidance of the gods, and attempts to solve problems through his own choices rather than simply following fate. This internal struggle becomes one of the story's emotional foundations. Rather than asking whether destiny exists, the film asks whether people must accept the future others choose for them. Perseus gradually realizes that destiny may open certain doors, but personal decisions determine how that destiny unfolds. He ultimately succeeds not because prophecy guarantees victory but because he consistently chooses courage, compassion, and perseverance despite overwhelming odds. The theme of identity is equally important. At the beginning of the story, Perseus believes he is an ordinary fisherman living a simple life with his family. The sudden revelation that he is actually the son of Zeus completely shatters his understanding of himself. He finds himself caught between two worlds. Humans increasingly view him as something more than mortal, while the gods expect him to embrace his divine heritage. Throughout the journey, Perseus struggles to answer one fundamental question: who am I? Is he defined by his bloodline or by the family that raised him? Is he a god, a man, or something between the two? The film consistently suggests that identity is determined not by birth but by choices. Perseus repeatedly rejects opportunities to separate himself from humanity, proving that character matters more than ancestry. His decision to remain among humans at the conclusion symbolizes his belief that compassion and loyalty outweigh divine privilege. Family also serves as one of the film's strongest emotional themes. The death of Perseus' adoptive family provides the motivation for every decision he makes afterward. Although Zeus is his biological father, Perseus never views him as his true parent. Instead, he remains loyal to Speros, the humble fisherman who raised him with kindness and love. This contrast highlights an important idea. Family is not created solely through blood but through sacrifice, guidance, and shared experience. The relationship between Zeus and Hades introduces another family conflict. They are brothers, yet centuries of jealousy and misunderstanding have transformed them into enemies. Their rivalry demonstrates how unresolved resentment can destroy even the strongest relationships. Hades feels abandoned and unappreciated despite fulfilling one of the most difficult responsibilities among the gods. His bitterness gradually evolves into hatred, illustrating how emotional wounds left untreated can become destructive forces affecting countless innocent lives. One of the defining characteristics of Clash of the Titans is its visual presentation. From towering mountains and ancient cities to terrifying monsters and divine realms, the film was designed to immerse audiences in a world where mythology feels tangible and larger than life. Director Louis Leterrier approached the project with the goal of creating a fantasy adventure that looked grounded and physical despite featuring gods, monsters, and supernatural events. Instead of presenting a colorful fairy tale, he chose a darker, more realistic aesthetic that emphasized danger, scale, and the harshness of the ancient world. Unlike many fantasy films that rely heavily on bright colors and magical imagery, Clash of the Titans adopts a muted and earthy color palette. Browns, grays, deep blues, weathered stone, dusty deserts, and storm-filled skies dominate much of the film. These colors help establish a world that feels ancient, unforgiving, and lived in rather than polished or idealized. The landscapes appear rugged and worn by time, reinforcing the idea that humanity survives in a dangerous environment where both nature and the gods pose constant threats. The cinematography, led by Peter Menzies Jr., supports this grounded approach by emphasizing natural environments whenever possible. Wide establishing shots frequently showcase massive mountains, endless deserts, rocky coastlines, and towering cliffs, reminding audiences of how small human beings appear within the larger world. These panoramic images are not simply beautiful scenery. They reinforce one of the film's recurring themes that mankind exists beneath forces far greater than itself. Scale is one of the film's most important visual tools. Throughout the story, Perseus and his companions are often framed as tiny figures surrounded by enormous landscapes or colossal creatures. Whether standing before the giant scorpions, entering Medusa's temple, or confronting the Kraken, the camera consistently emphasizes the overwhelming size of the obstacles they face. This visual contrast creates tension because the audience immediately understands how impossible the hero's mission appears. Camera movement also plays an important role in maintaining energy throughout the film. During quieter moments, the camera remains relatively stable, allowing viewers to absorb the environment and focus on character interactions. However, once action begins, the cinematography becomes much more dynamic. Handheld shots, rapid tracking movements, sweeping crane shots, and fast camera rotations place viewers directly inside battles rather than observing them from a distance. Louis Leterrier wanted audiences to feel as though they were fighting alongside Perseus instead of simply watching from the sidelines. This approach is particularly noticeable during combat scenes. Sword fights are filmed with aggressive camera movement that mirrors the chaos experienced by the characters. Instead of perfectly choreographed duels with long uninterrupted takes, the battles emphasize speed, confusion, and survival. The audience experiences the uncertainty of combat as the camera frequently shifts perspectives, following different characters while maintaining the intensity of each encounter. Lighting serves as another powerful storytelling device throughout the film. Zeus is almost always associated with bright golden illumination. Whenever he appears, powerful beams of light surround him, emphasizing both his divine authority and his connection to the heavens. The golden tones suggest life, creation, and supreme power. Even his armor reflects this visual identity, glowing with radiant energy that immediately distinguishes him from every human character. In contrast, Hades exists almost entirely within darkness. Shadows, smoke, ash, and blackened environments dominate his scenes. Rather than simply dressing the character in dark clothing, the filmmakers extended this visual identity into every aspect of his presentation. His surroundings appear cold and lifeless, while black smoke constantly flows from his body as though darkness itself has become part of his physical form. This visual design reinforces his role as the ruler of the underworld without requiring lengthy exposition. The contrast between Zeus and Hades creates one of the film's strongest visual motifs. Every encounter involving the two brothers immediately communicates their opposing philosophies through color and lighting alone. Gold represents order, authority, and creation, while black symbolizes decay, resentment, and destruction. This simple but effective visual language helps audiences understand the emotional conflict between the gods even before they speak. Costume design contributes significantly to the film's visual identity. Unlike many fantasy films featuring extravagant armor that appears decorative rather than functional, Clash of the Titans presents equipment that looks practical and battle-worn. Perseus begins the story wearing simple fisherman clothing that reflects his humble upbringing. As his journey progresses, his armor remains relatively modest, reinforcing his identity as an ordinary man rather than an untouchable mythical champion. Zeus' armor, however, serves an entirely different purpose. Its brilliant golden appearance resembles living metal more than traditional bronze, emphasizing his divine status. Every detail appears carefully crafted to inspire or rather than merely provide protection. Hade's armor provides the opposite effect. Blackened, jagged, and almost fused to his body, it resembles something grown from darkness rather than forged by human hands. These contrasting costume designs visually reinforce the personalities and moral positions of both gods. Production design also deserves considerable attention. The city of Argos combines historical inspiration with fantasy architecture, creating an environment that feels recognizable yet mythical. Massive statues, towering temples, enormous staircases, and monumental public spaces emphasize the importance of religion within society while reflecting the city's dependence upon divine favor. Rather than reproducing historically accurate Greece, the filmmakers created a heightened reality that captures the spirit of mythology instead of strict historical authenticity. While Clash of the Titans is often remembered for its spectacular visual effects and large-scale action, its audio design plays an equally important role in creating the film's atmosphere. Every sword clash, monstrous roar, thunderous explosion, whispered prayer, and orchestral swell works together to transport audiences into a world where gods walk among mortals and mythical creatures lurk in every shadow. The film's soundtrack and sound design were carefully crafted to support the emotional journey of Perseus while reinforcing the immense scale of the ancient mythological world. The musical score was composed by Ramin Djawadi, one of the most respected composers working in film and television. By the time Clash of the Titans was released in 2010, Djawadi had already established himself through scores for films such as Iron Man and television productions including Prison Break. Although he would later become globally famous for composing the unforgettable music of Game of Thrones, Clash of the Titans represented another important step in demonstrating his ability to combine traditional orchestral writing with modern cinematic intensity. Djawadi approached the score with a clear objective. Rather than attempting to recreate the style of classical Greek music, he wanted the soundtrack to feel timeless and emotionally powerful. His compositions combine a full symphony orchestra with heavy percussion, powerful brass sections, dramatic choir arrangements, and modern rhythmic elements. The result is music that sounds both ancient and contemporary, perfectly matching the film's approach of reimagining mythology for modern audiences. One of the defining characteristics of the score is its emphasis on rhythm. Instead of relying solely on memorable melodies, many action sequences are driven by powerful percussion that creates an almost relentless sense of momentum. Deep drums, pounding rhythms, and aggressive orchestral pulses accompany Perseus throughout his journey, making even quieter scenes feel as though danger is never far away. This constant underlying energy reflects the hero's emotional state, as he is rarely allowed moments of complete peace following the loss of his family. The opening music immediately establishes the tone of the film. Rather than introducing audiences with a gentle or mysterious theme, the score begins with strength and grandeur. Brass instruments announce the arrival of the gods while deep orchestral textures suggest an ancient civilization ruled by forces beyond human understanding. From the very first moments, the audience understands that this is not simply an adventure story but a conflict involving divine beings whose decisions affect the fate of entire kingdoms. Every major character receives subtle musical identity throughout the film. Zeus is accompanied by majestic orchestral themes featuring soaring brass and noble harmonies. His music communicates authority, wisdom, and overwhelming power. Even when Zeus appears briefly, the score reminds audiences that they are witnessing the king of Olympus. His musical presence carries dignity and reassurance while still hinting at the burden of leadership resting upon his shoulders. Hades receives an entirely different musical treatment. His scenes frequently feature darker orchestral textures, lower string instruments, unsettling choir voices, and distorted tonal elements that create unease before he even speaks. Rather than using sudden loud music to create fear, Dewadi often allows Hades' themes to build slowly, surrounding the character with an atmosphere of corruption and inevitable destruction. This restrained approach makes his appearances more intimidating because the audience senses danger long before any action begins. Perseus' musical journey reflects his personal transformation throughout the story. Early scenes focus on emotional restraint, using quieter orchestration that emphasizes grief and uncertainty rather than heroism. As Perseus gradually accepts responsibility for protecting others, his musical themes become increasingly confident. Additional brass instruments, stronger rhythms, and larger orchestral arrangements accompany his growth from ordinary fisherman to legendary hero. By the film's climax, his music has evolved into a fully heroic theme without losing the emotional humanity established earlier. One particularly effective aspect of the soundtrack is its use of silence. Modern blockbuster films often rely on continuous music to maintain excitement, but Clash of the Titans occasionally removes musical accompaniment entirely during moments of suspense. These periods of silence allow environmental sounds to dominate, making audiences focus more intensely on every movement and every breath. The Medusa sequence provides one of the finest examples of this technique. Inside the abandoned temple, the music becomes remarkably restrained. Instead of overwhelming viewers with loud orchestral compositions, the soundtrack allows silence, distant echoes, footsteps, falling debris, and the subtle movement of snakes to generate tension. Every sound becomes significant because the audience understands that even the smallest noise might reveal Medusa's location. When music does appear during this sequence, it enters gradually, increasing suspense rather than announcing danger too early. Sound effects play an equally important role throughout the film. Every mythical creature possesses its own distinct audio identity. The giant scorpions produce sharp clicking sounds with their claws while their massive bodies generate heavy impacts that emphasize their enormous weight. These carefully designed sounds help convince audiences that the creatures occupy real physical space rather than existing solely as computer-generated images. The Kraken's sound design represents one of the film's greatest technical achievements. Because no real-world animal could serve as a direct reference, the sound designers combined recordings from numerous sources to create its terrifying voice. Elements inspired by whales, elephants, lions, industrial machinery, crashing waves, and low-frequency vibrations were blended together to produce a roar unlike anything heard in nature. The result communicates not only the creature's immense size but also its supernatural origins. Every time the Kraken moves, the audience hears more than simple footsteps. Buildings collapse, stone fractures, water crashes violently against its body, and deep vibrations fill the soundtrack. These layered sounds ensure viewers feel the creature's presence even before fully seeing it. The audio constantly reinforces the idea that this is not merely a large monster but a force capable of destroying entire civilizations. Medusa's sound design demonstrates a completely different philosophy. Rather than emphasizing overwhelming power, her sounds focus on stealth and psychological fear. The movement of countless snakes forms a continuous background presence, creating subtle unease throughout the temple sequence. Gentle hissing, scales sliding across stone, quiet breathing, and sudden bursts of movement make audiences constantly question where she might appear next. This restrained approach proves far more frightening than simply making the creature louder. Environmental sound also contributes significantly to world building. The filmmakers carefully crafted distinct audio atmospheres for every location. The peaceful fishing village at the beginning features crashing waves, seabirds, gentle wind, and quiet human activity, establishing the ordinary life Perseus eventually loses. Argos introduces busy markets, distant conversations, horses, temple bells, and large crowds, creating the impression of a thriving ancient city. The underworld scenes replace these familiar sounds with whispers, distant screams, rumbling earth, crackling fire, and unnatural echoes. These subtle details distinguish Hades' realm from the human world without requiring extensive visual explanation. Similarly, Mount Olympus feels almost otherworldly because of its airy acoustics, distant choir voices, and constant low-frequency resonance that suggests unimaginable divine power. Combat scenes required especially detailed sound design. Every sword strike, shield impact, arrow release, and explosion was individually recorded and layered to produce satisfying realism. The filmmakers avoided making battles sound overly polished or artificial. Instead, metal collisions often feel heavy and imperfect, reflecting the brutal nature of ancient warfare. The result gives each fight greater physical credibility while maintaining cinematic excitement. Voice performances also contribute enormously to the film's audio identity. Liam Neeson's naturally commanding voice gives Zeus immediate authority. Even simple dialogue feels important because of his calm, measured delivery. Ralph Fiennes adopts a very different vocal approach for Hades, speaking with restrained bitterness that occasionally erupts into explosive anger. His voice often carries subtle digital enhancement, adding an otherworldly quality without becoming distracting. Sam Worthington intentionally portrays Perseus with a more grounded vocal performance. Unlike the gods, he rarely delivers dramatic speeches. Instead, his dialogue feels conversational and emotionally restrained, reinforcing his identity as an ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances. This contrast between human and divine voices subtly reinforces the film's central conflict. The pacing of the soundtrack deserves particular recognition. Dewadi understands when to allow music to dominate and when to step back. Large orchestral passages accompany moments of triumph, discovery, and divine intervention, while quieter scenes often rely on minimal instrumentation that lets dialogue and environmental sounds take precedence. This balance prevents the score from becoming overwhelming despite the film's constant action. The final confrontation with the Kraken demonstrates the soundtrack working at its highest level. As the enormous creature approaches Argos, the orchestra gradually builds in intensity rather than immediately reaching maximum volume. Layer by layer, additional instruments join the composition until the music matches the scale of the unfolding disaster. During Perseus' final attack, heroic themes merge with massive percussion and choir voices, creating an emotionally satisfying climax that rewards the audience's investment in the journey. Following the battle, the score shifts noticeably in tone. Instead of ending with aggressive action music, Dewadi introduces calmer orchestral themes reflecting Perseus' emotional resolution. The music acknowledges both the victories achieved and the sacrifices made along the way. This quieter conclusion reminds audiences that the story has always been about more than defeating monsters. It has also been about accepting responsibility, honoring loved ones, and choosing one's own path. Although Clash of the Titans did not become as musically iconic as some fantasy franchises, its soundtrack remains an excellent example of modern blockbuster scoring. Ramin Djawadi successfully blended traditional orchestral techniques with contemporary cinematic energy, creating music that supports both intimate emotional moments and spectacular action sequences. Combined with meticulous sound effects, immersive environmental audio, and strong vocal performances, the film's sound design transforms mythology into a living, breathing world where every roar, whisper, thunderclap, and orchestral note contributes to the epic scale of Perseus' legendary adventure. When Clash of the Titans was released in March 2010, it arrived with enormous expectations. It was a remake of a beloved fantasy classic, featured an impressive ensemble cast led by Sam Worthington, Liam Neeson, and Ralph Fiennes, and was released during the height of Hollywood's fascination with mythology, fantasy adventures, and three-dimensional cinema. Coming only a few months after the record-breaking success of Avatar, audiences expected another visually spectacular blockbuster. While the film proved to be a major commercial success, the critical response was far more divided, creating one of the most interesting contrasts between box office performance and professional reviews during that period. From a financial standpoint, Clash of the Titans achieved exactly what Warner Bros. Had hoped for. Produced with a budget estimated at approximately $125 million, the film earned well over $490 million worldwide during its theatrical run. It performed strongly not only in North America but also across Europe, Asia, and many other international markets. This impressive global performance demonstrated that mythology-based action adventures still possessed enormous worldwide appeal. Its commercial success also confirmed the growing international popularity of fantasy blockbusters. Audiences were eager to watch stories involving ancient legends, mythical creatures, and larger-than-life heroes presented with modern visual effects. The box office results quickly convinced Warner Bros. That the franchise had enough potential to continue, ultimately leading to the production of the sequel Wrath of the Titans in 2012. Despite its financial achievements, professional critics responded much less enthusiastically. Many reviewers praised the film's ambition, impressive cast, and spectacular action scenes, but believed the screenplay lacked the emotional depth necessary to elevate the story beyond standard blockbuster entertainment. One of the most common criticisms centered on the narrative itself. Critics argued that while the movie moved quickly from one exciting sequence to another, it rarely allowed enough time for meaningful character development or emotional reflection. Some reviewers felt Perseus, despite being the central hero, remained emotionally distant for much of the story. Although audiences understood his motivation following the death of his adoptive family, several critics believed the screenplay focused so heavily on action that it neglected opportunities to explore his internal conflict more deeply. They argued that his transformation from grieving fisherman to legendary hero sometimes felt rushed rather than fully earned. Sam Worthington's performance generated mixed reactions. Many viewers appreciated his physical commitment, believable action scenes, and grounded interpretation of Perseus. His portrayal of a reluctant hero distinguished the character from more traditional fantasy protagonists who immediately embraced destiny. However, some critics believed Worthington's restrained acting style occasionally lacked the emotional range needed for a story involving such enormous personal loss and mythological significance. Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes received considerably stronger praise. Reviewers consistently highlighted both actors as among the film's greatest strengths. Neeson's commanding portrayal of Zeus brought dignity and authority to the King of the Gods, while Fiennes delivered a memorable interpretation of Hades that balanced theatrical menace with genuine emotional bitterness. Even critics who disliked many aspects of the film frequently acknowledged that scenes involving the two veteran actors added gravitas and dramatic weight whenever they appeared. Mads Mikkelsen also received positive attention for his portrayal of Draco. Although his role was smaller than those of the leading actors, critics praised his disciplined and believable performance as the experienced commander guiding Perseus throughout much of the adventure. Many reviewers felt Mikkelsen's understated approach helped ground the story, providing a realistic military leader amid the supernatural spectacle. Gemma Arterton's performance as Io generated mixed but generally favorable reactions. Some appreciated her calm, wise interpretation of the immortal guide, while others felt the screenplay underused both the actress and the character. Since Io differs significantly from her mythological counterpart, mythology enthusiasts sometimes criticized the creative liberties taken with her role. Nevertheless, Arterton's performance itself was widely viewed as sincere and emotionally engaging. The screenplay became one of the most frequently criticized aspects of the production. Numerous reviewers argued that the dialogue often relied too heavily on exposition rather than allowing relationships to develop naturally. Characters occasionally explained mythology or plot developments through lengthy conversations instead of letting audiences discover information gradually through events. As a result, some emotional moments lacked the impact they might have achieved with stronger character writing. Another recurring criticism involved pacing. Although the film maintains a consistently fast tempo, several critics believed it rushed from one action sequence to another without providing enough quieter moments for audiences to connect emotionally with the characters. Some described the structure as resembling a series of individual battles linked together rather than a fully cohesive dramatic journey. While this approach kept the film entertaining, reviewers suggested it sacrificed emotional investment for constant momentum. Although Clash of the Titans received mixed reviews upon its release in 2010, its long-term legacy extends far beyond its initial critical reception. The film became one of the defining mythology-based blockbusters of the early 2010s, demonstrating that ancient legends could still attract worldwide audiences when combined with modern filmmaking technology. Its commercial success, memorable visual sequences, impressive cast, and recognizable mythology helped ensure that it would remain an important part of the fantasy genre, influencing future films, inspiring discussions about Greek mythology and contributing to Hollywood's continued fascination with legendary heroes and mythical creatures. Perhaps the film's most immediate legacy was proving that mythology could once again become commercially viable for major studios. Prior to its release, successful historical epics such as Gladiator, Troy, and 300 had shown audiences were interested in stories inspired by the ancient world. However, Clash of the Titans leaned more heavily into fantasy, featuring gods, monsters, magical weapons, and supernatural powers rather than attempting historical realism. Its worldwide box office success confirmed that viewers were eager to embrace mythology presented as large-scale blockbuster entertainment. The financial performance of the film encouraged Hollywood to continue investing in similar projects. During the following years, audiences saw the release of Wrath of the Titans, Immortals, Hercules, The Legend of Hercules, Gods of Egypt, and several other fantasy adventures inspired by ancient myths. While each film approached mythology differently, Clash of the Titans demonstrated that there remained a substantial international audience for stories involving legendary heroes, Olympian gods, and mythical creatures. Its success also directly resulted in the production of Wrath of the Titans in 2012. The sequel reunited Sam Worthington, Liam Neeson, and Ralph Fiennes while expanding the mythology established in the first film. Although opinions regarding the sequel remained divided, its existence alone reflected the confidence Warner Bros. Had gained from the commercial performance of the original remake. Without the impressive worldwide box office of Clash of the Titans, the continuation of Perseus' story would likely never have been produced. Another important aspect of the film's legacy involves its contribution to the portrayal of Greek mythology in modern popular culture. Before 2010, many younger audiences associated Greek mythology primarily with literature, school lessons, animated adaptations, or older fantasy films. Clash of the Titans introduced a visually modern interpretation that emphasized realism, large-scale action, and cinematic spectacle. For many viewers born in the late 1990s and early 2000s, this became their first exposure to characters such as Perseus, Zeus, Hades, Medusa, Pegasus, and the Kraken. Although the movie took significant creative liberties with the original myths, it inspired countless viewers to explore the authentic legends afterward. Teachers, librarians, and mythology enthusiasts frequently noted renewed interest in Greek mythology following the film's release. Many younger audiences sought books, documentaries, and educational resources to compare the movie's story with the original ancient tales. In this way, the film served as a gateway into one of humanity's oldest collections of stories. One of the movie's most enduring cultural contributions remains the phrase "release the Kraken." Although originally introduced in the 1981 version, the 2010 remake brought the line to an entirely new global audience. Liam Neeson's commanding delivery quickly transformed the phrase into one of the most recognizable quotations in modern fantasy cinema. Over the years, it has appeared in television programs, sports broadcasts, political cartoons, internet memes, marketing campaigns, and everyday conversation. The phrase gradually evolved beyond its original meaning. Today, people often use "release the Kraken" humorously whenever something powerful, dramatic, or unstoppable is about to occur. Sports commentators use it before a star player enters a game. Gamers say it before activating powerful abilities. Businesses occasionally reference it when unveiling major products. Few movie quotes have achieved such widespread everyday recognition while remaining connected to a fantasy adventure. The Medusa sequence has also developed an impressive legacy among filmmakers and audiences alike. Even critics who disliked other aspects of the film consistently praised this portion of the story. Over time, it has become one of the most frequently referenced examples of how suspense can successfully blend with fantasy action. Rather than relying solely on spectacle, the sequence creates genuine tension through lighting, sound design, careful pacing, and restrained use of the creature herself. Many later fantasy productions adopted similar approaches when introducing legendary monsters. Instead of immediately revealing creatures in full detail, filmmakers increasingly emphasized mystery, atmosphere, and psychological tension before showcasing the visual effects. The Medusa encounter demonstrated that anticipation often creates greater excitement than constant action, becoming one of the remake's most respected achievements. From a technical standpoint, Clash of the Titans occupies an interesting place in the history of digital filmmaking. The movie showcased the growing capabilities of computer-generated creatures during a period when visual effects technology was advancing rapidly. The Kraken, Medusa, giant scorpions, Pegasus, and the Djinn represented highly ambitious digital creations for their time. Although technology has continued improving dramatically since 2010, many of these creatures remain visually impressive due to the attention given to animation, movement, lighting, and environmental interaction. At the same time, the film left an equally significant legacy through its controversial three-dimensional conversion. Following Avatar's unprecedented success, numerous studios rushed to convert existing productions into 3D. Clash of the Titans became perhaps the most widely discussed example of the limitations associated with this practice. Critics and audiences alike pointed to its darker image and inconsistent depth effects as evidence that stereoscopic filmmaking should be planned during production rather than added afterward. One of the reasons Clash of the Titans continues to attract viewers years after its release is that different audiences have interpreted the film in different ways. While critics often focused on the screenplay, pacing, or visual presentation, many moviegoers connected with the film on a much more personal level. Some saw it as a thrilling fantasy adventure filled with legendary monsters and heroic battles, while others viewed it as a story about grief, identity, courage, and choosing one's own path in life. The film's ability to generate these different interpretations has allowed it to remain relevant long after its theatrical release. For younger audiences, the movie often represented their first introduction to Greek mythology. Many children and teenagers who watched the film in 2010 had little knowledge of Perseus, Zeus, Hades, Medusa, Pegasus, or the ancient legends that inspired the story. Instead of approaching the movie as an adaptation of classical mythology, they experienced it simply as an exciting fantasy adventure. The impressive creatures, memorable action scenes, and clear heroic journey made the mythology feel accessible rather than intimidating. As these younger viewers grew older, many returned to the film with a different perspective. After learning more about Greek mythology through school, books, documentaries, or other films, they began noticing the creative changes made by the filmmakers. This often created an interesting viewing experience. Rather than diminishing their enjoyment, the differences encouraged comparisons between the original myths and the modern adaptation. For many people, the movie became a gateway that inspired a lifelong interest in ancient history and mythology. Older audiences often approached the film from an entirely different viewpoint. Many had fond memories of watching the original 1981 Clash of the Titans during childhood. For them, the remake was inevitably compared with Ray Harryhausen's groundbreaking stop-motion animation and the charm of the earlier production. Some appreciated the modern visual effects and larger scale, while others missed the handcrafted quality that had made the original feel unique. These nostalgic comparisons became an important part of the audience conversation surrounding the film. Some viewers argued that modern technology created more realistic monsters but lost some of the personality present in the earlier version. Others believed the remake succeeded because it introduced familiar mythology to an entirely new generation using contemporary filmmaking techniques. Neither perspective proved universally correct, demonstrating how personal experience strongly influences the way audiences interpret remakes. One of the themes that resonated most strongly with viewers was Perseus' struggle with identity. Unlike many traditional fantasy heroes who immediately embrace their destiny, Perseus spends much of the film rejecting the role others expect him to play. He refuses to define himself solely by his bloodline or divine heritage. Many audiences found this aspect surprisingly relatable. In everyday life, people often face expectations based on family, social background, career paths, or the opinions of others. Perseus' determination to choose his own future rather than simply accepting destiny mirrors challenges experienced by many individuals. His journey suggests that identity is formed through personal choices rather than circumstances beyond one's control. This message continues to resonate because it reflects universal human experiences that extend far beyond mythology. The film also connected with audiences through its portrayal of grief. Perseus loses the family who raised him during the opening act, and this tragedy shapes every decision he makes afterward. Many viewers recognized the realism of his emotional response despite the fantastical setting. He experiences anger, confusion, denial, and eventually acceptance rather than instantly becoming a fearless hero. Some audience members interpreted the story as an exploration of how people recover after devastating personal loss. Perseus cannot change the past or bring back those he loves, but he gradually learns to transform his pain into determination to protect others. This emotional journey gave the film greater depth for viewers who had experienced grief or personal hardship in their own lives. Another aspect frequently discussed by audiences involves the relationship between humans and the gods. Rather than portraying Olympus as unquestionably wise or benevolent, the film presents divine beings who possess flaws, emotions, jealousy, and pride. Many viewers appreciated this more complex portrayal because it challenged the traditional idea that powerful authority figures are automatically correct. Some interpreted this conflict symbolically rather than literally. The gods can be seen as representing any form of authority that expects obedience without earning respect. Humanity's growing resistance reflects people's desire to make independent choices rather than blindly following established traditions. Under this interpretation, the story becomes less about mythology and more about personal freedom, responsibility, and questioning inherited beliefs. The rivalry between Zeus and Hades also generated considerable discussion among audiences. Rather than presenting Hades as evil simply for the sake of villainy, the film suggests his bitterness developed after centuries of feeling neglected and unappreciated. While few viewers justified his actions, many recognized the emotional complexity behind his character. Some audience members viewed Hades as an example of how resentment can gradually consume a person's identity if left unresolved. Others interpreted him as representing the consequences of isolation and rejection. These psychological interpretations made the character more memorable than a traditional one-dimensional villain because his motivations felt emotionally understandable even when his actions became monstrous. The Medusa sequence became one of the film's most universally praised moments among audiences. Many viewers described it as the highlight of the entire movie because it combined suspense, horror, mythology, and action more effectively than any other sequence. The atmosphere inside the abandoned temple created genuine tension, and audiences appreciated that victory required intelligence rather than overwhelming strength. Over time, many fans have come to regard the Medusa encounter as one of the finest monster sequences in modern fantasy cinema. It demonstrated that audiences often respond more strongly to carefully built suspense than constant action. Even viewers who expressed disappointment with other parts of the film almost always remembered the Medusa scene as particularly effective. The giant scorpion battle and the appearance of the Kraken also left lasting impressions. Younger audiences especially admired the enormous scale of these creatures, often describing them as some of the film's most exciting moments. For many viewers, these scenes fulfilled the promise of seeing legendary monsters brought to life using modern visual effects. The phrase "release the Kraken" quickly became one of the most recognizable elements of the entire film. Audiences embraced the line not simply because of its dramatic delivery by Liam Neeson, but because it perfectly captured the excitement of unleashing overwhelming power. Over the following years, people continued using the phrase in sports, gaming, internet culture, and everyday conversation whenever something powerful or dramatic was about to happen. Many viewers also reflected on the film's message regarding power itself. Throughout the story, Perseus repeatedly refuses opportunities to rely entirely on divine gifts. Instead, he chooses to trust his own judgment and the people fighting beside him. This decision resonated with audiences who interpreted the story as suggesting that true strength comes from character rather than inherited privilege or supernatural abilities. Family audiences generally appreciated the film because it provided action without excessive complexity. Parents often found it suitable for introducing older children to mythology, while younger viewers enjoyed the adventure even without understanding every mythological reference. The straightforward narrative made it accessible to broad audiences across different age groups. At the same time, mythology enthusiasts expressed more divided opinions. Some appreciated seeing familiar legends adapted for modern cinema despite historical inaccuracies. Others wished the screenplay had remained closer to the original Greek myths. These discussions continue today, illustrating how deeply people care about stories that have survived for thousands of years. Interestingly, audience appreciation for the film has grown somewhat over time. During its theatrical release, Expectations were extremely high because it followed Avatar and arrived during the rapid expansion of three-dimensional cinema. Many viewers judged it against those enormous expectations. Years later, audiences often revisit the film without the same pressure, allowing them to appreciate its strengths more fully. Streaming services and home media have introduced the movie to entirely new viewers who approach it without remembering the critical debates surrounding its release. These audiences frequently describe the film as an entertaining fantasy adventure rather than focusing on comparisons with the original or discussions about the controversial 3D conversion. This shift demonstrates how public perception of a film can evolve as cultural expectations change. Fans of fantasy cinema also appreciate the film's commitment to large-scale practical adventure. Unlike some modern productions that rely almost entirely on humor or self-awareness, Clash of the Titans presents its mythology with sincerity. The characters genuinely believe in the stakes of their mission, and the filmmakers rarely undermine emotional moments with unnecessary jokes. Many viewers have come to value this straightforward storytelling approach in an era where many fantasy films adopt lighter, more comedic tones. Perhaps the most meaningful audience interpretation concerns Perseus' final decision. After defeating the Kraken and restoring peace, Zeus offers him a place among the gods. Rather than accepting unlimited power, Perseus chooses to remain among humanity. For many viewers, this ending represents the film's central message. Greatness is not achieved through status, wealth, supernatural ability, or noble birth. Instead, true heroism comes from loyalty, compassion, humility, and the willingness to protect others despite personal sacrifice. Although Clash of the Titans is remembered primarily for its large-scale action and spectacular visual effects, the story is ultimately driven by the journeys of its characters. At its heart, the film is about transformation. Nearly every major character experiences some form of personal conflict, whether it involves accepting responsibility, overcoming grief, confronting pride, or choosing between revenge and compassion. While the screenplay focuses heavily on action, the emotional development of Perseus and the supporting characters provides the foundation that gives the adventure meaning beyond its battles against mythical monsters. The central character arc belongs to Perseus, whose journey follows the classic structure of an ordinary man becoming an extraordinary hero. Unlike many legendary warriors who eagerly embrace greatness, Perseus begins the story as a humble fisherman with no desire for glory. He values his simple life, his adoptive family, and the peaceful existence he has always known. His identity is firmly rooted in humanity rather than mythology, making his later discoveries far more emotionally significant. The turning point in Perseus' life comes when Hades attacks, killing his adoptive family. This tragedy completely changes his worldview. In a matter of moments, he loses everything that has defined him. His grief quickly transforms into anger, and that anger becomes directed toward all of the gods rather than Hades alone. At this stage of the story, Perseus is driven almost entirely by emotion rather than reason. His desire for revenge overshadows any interest in understanding his own origins or accepting his destiny. Soon afterward, Perseus learns the truth about his birth. Zeus reveals that Perseus is actually his son, making him a demigod. Rather than embracing this revelation, Perseus rejects it completely. He refuses to acknowledge Zeus as his father because, in his eyes, his true father will always be Speros, the fisherman who loved and raised him. This decision establishes one of the film's most important emotional conflicts. Perseus struggles not only against external enemies but also against questions about his own identity. Throughout the journey, Perseus repeatedly refuses gifts offered by the gods. He rejects powerful weapons, magical armor, and opportunities to rely upon divine intervention. These decisions reflect his determination to succeed as a human being rather than as a god. However, they also reveal his stubbornness. His hatred toward Olympus initially prevents him from seeing that not every god shares Hades' cruelty. Part of his character development involves learning that rejecting everything connected to his divine heritage can become just as limiting as blindly accepting it. As Perseus travels with Draco and the soldiers, he gradually changes from an isolated individual into a leader. At first, many members of the expedition distrust him. They view him as inexperienced, emotionally unstable, and uncertain of his place in the world. Perseus also struggles to trust them, believing his mission is deeply personal rather than a shared responsibility. Over time, however, mutual respect develops through shared hardship. Each challenge forces Perseus to mature. The battles against the giant scorpions, the encounters with the jinn, and especially the confrontation with Medusa require him to think beyond his own anger. Instead of reacting emotionally, he begins making strategic decisions that protect those around him. These experiences teach him that leadership is not about possessing the greatest strength but about earning the confidence of others through courage and selflessness. By the climax, Perseus has transformed into the hero the world needs. Importantly, this transformation does not occur because he fully accepts his divine blood. Instead, it happens because he embraces the qualities taught by his human family: compassion, humility, perseverance, and loyalty. His greatest victory comes not from becoming more godlike but from remaining deeply human despite possessing extraordinary abilities. The final decision offered by Zeus completes Perseus' arc perfectly. After defeating the Kraken and saving Argos, Zeus invites his son to join the gods on Mount Olympus. Accepting this offer would grant Perseus unimaginable power and immortality. Yet he refuses. He chooses to remain among humanity because he believes his place is beside ordinary people rather than above them. This choice confirms that Perseus has finally defined his own identity independent of both destiny and divine expectation. Zeus experiences his own meaningful character development throughout the film. At the beginning, he rules Olympus with confidence but also with growing concern. He recognizes that humanity's belief in the gods is weakening, threatening the balance between mortals and immortals. Zeus genuinely wishes to protect mankind, yet he often relies on displays of overwhelming authority instead of understanding why people have lost faith. His relationship with Perseus forces Zeus to reconsider his own role as both a god and a father. Initially, he believes Perseus will naturally embrace his divine heritage. Instead, his son repeatedly rejects him. This rejection creates emotional conflict for Zeus because he realizes that biological connection alone cannot create a meaningful relationship. Throughout the story, Zeus gradually learns to respect Perseus' independence rather than attempting to control him. By the conclusion, Zeus demonstrates genuine growth by allowing Perseus complete freedom to choose his own path. Rather than insisting his son join Olympus, he accepts Perseus' decision to remain human. This moment reflects Zeus' evolution from a ruler accustomed to obedience into a father capable of respecting personal choice. Hades follows a very different character arc. Unlike Perseus or Zeus, Hades does not grow toward redemption. Instead, he descends further into obsession and bitterness. His motivations stem from centuries of resentment after being assigned to rule the underworld while Zeus became king of the gods. Although his grievances may contain elements of truth, Hades allows those feelings to consume his entire identity. Interestingly, Hades serves as a mirror image of Perseus. Both characters begin the story driven by grief and anger. Both have suffered personal loss. Both desire justice against those they believe responsible for their pain. The crucial difference lies in the choices they make. Perseus eventually transforms his anger into compassion and responsibility, while Hades allows his bitterness to become the defining feature of his existence. Their opposing journeys illustrate the film's belief that suffering does not determine destiny, personal choices do. Io functions as both mentor and emotional guide throughout Perseus' journey. Unlike many traditional fantasy mentors who simply provide information, Io encourages Perseus to discover his own strength. She understands his divine heritage but never pressures him to accept it. Instead, she consistently reminds him that true heroism comes from character rather than birthright. Her patience contrasts sharply with Perseus' emotional impulsiveness. Whenever he becomes consumed by anger or doubt, Io offers calm perspective. Rather than solving his problems for him, she helps him develop the confidence necessary to solve them himself. This subtle guidance makes her one of the story's most important influences despite having fewer action scenes than many other characters. Draco undergoes one of the film's most satisfying supporting character arcs. Introduced as a disciplined military commander, he initially views Perseus with understandable skepticism. To Draco, Perseus appears inexperienced and emotionally driven, hardly the ideal person to lead such a dangerous mission. However, Draco never allows personal pride to prevent him from recognizing genuine growth. As Perseus repeatedly demonstrates courage and selflessness, Draco gradually shifts from reluctant ally to loyal supporter. His willingness to acknowledge Perseus' development reflects Draco's own maturity as a leader. Rather than clinging stubbornly to first impressions, he evaluates people based on their actions. His eventual sacrifice highlights the depth of respect that has developed between the two men. Princess Andromeda experiences quieter but equally meaningful development. Although much of her role centers on becoming the intended sacrifice for the Kraken, she refuses to behave like a helpless victim. Faced with overwhelming circumstances, she consistently places the welfare of her people above her own survival. Her calm acceptance of responsibility demonstrates courage different from Perseus' physical heroism. She fights not with weapons but with dignity and selflessness. The Jinn also contribute to the film's exploration of personal growth. Initially mysterious and seemingly hostile, they gradually reveal themselves as wise warriors who understand mortality more deeply than most humans. Their willingness to join Perseus despite knowing the dangers ahead reinforces the story's recurring message that courage often means accepting inevitable sacrifice for a greater purpose. Even secondary characters such as Perseus leave lasting emotional impact despite limited screen time. His kindness, humility, and unconditional love establish the moral foundation upon which Perseus builds his identity. Although Perseus dies early in the narrative, his influence continues shaping Perseus' decisions throughout the story. In many ways, the values taught by his adoptive father ultimately prove stronger than the power offered by Olympus. The relationships between characters evolve naturally as the journey progresses. Perseus and Draco move from mutual uncertainty to complete trust. Perseus and Io develop emotional understanding based on shared respect rather than immediate romance. Zeus gradually shifts from distant authority figure to supportive father. Even the conflict between Zeus and Hades deepens as audiences gain greater understanding of the emotional wounds underlying their rivalry. Collectively, these character arcs reinforce one of the film's central ideas. Greatness is defined not by supernatural power but by personal growth. Perseus succeeds because he learns compassion, leadership, humility, and responsibility. Zeus grows by respecting freedom instead of demanding obedience. Draco earns admiration through loyalty and sacrifice. Hades falls because he refuses to let go of resentment. Every major character illustrates how personal choices shape identity far more than destiny, status, or extraordinary abilities. Ultimately, the emotional journeys within Clash of the Titans give the mythological spectacle lasting significance. Beneath the battles against monsters and the conflicts among gods lies a story about becoming the person one chooses to be. Perseus' transformation from grieving fisherman to legendary hero reminds audiences that courage is not inherited, leadership is not granted by birth, and true strength comes from the values individuals choose to live by when facing impossible challenges. One of the most important elements in bringing the world of Clash of the Titans to life is its costume and set design. Although audiences often remember the film for its spectacular monsters and visual effects, much of its immersive quality comes from the physical world built by the filmmakers. Every costume, weapon, piece of armor, temple, palace, village, and ruined landscape was carefully designed to create the impression of an ancient civilization where gods, monsters, and ordinary humans coexist. Rather than pursuing strict historical accuracy, the production team chose to create a stylized version of ancient Greece that felt believable while still embracing the grandeur of mythology. The overall design philosophy centered on realism. Director Louis Leterrier wanted audiences to feel that the characters lived in a harsh and dangerous world instead of an idealized fantasy kingdom. As a result, costumes often appear weathered, dusty, scratched, and worn from constant use. Armor carries dents from previous battles, clothing reflects years of hard labor, and buildings display signs of age rather than appearing newly constructed. These details help establish a living world that existed long before the events of the film began. Perseus' costume perfectly reflects his personal journey. At the beginning of the story, he wears simple fisherman clothing made from rough fabrics with practical leather accessories. Nothing about his appearance suggests royalty or divine heritage. His clothing immediately communicates humility, hard work, and an ordinary life spent at sea alongside his adoptive family. The filmmakers intentionally avoided giving Perseus any heroic visual qualities during these opening scenes because they wanted audiences to see him first as an everyday man. As the adventure progresses, Perseus' appearance changes gradually rather than dramatically. Unlike many fantasy heroes who receive magnificent magical armor halfway through their journey, Perseus continues wearing practical equipment gathered during his travels. His armor remains relatively simple and functional, reflecting his refusal to embrace his identity as a demigod. The scratches, dirt, and damage accumulating on his clothing throughout the film visually reinforce every hardship he experiences. By the final battle, his appearance tells the story of his journey without requiring any dialogue. His sword, shield, and other weapons follow the same philosophy. Rather than looking ceremonial or decorative, they appear designed for survival. Every piece of equipment feels heavy, practical, and well used, emphasizing that Perseus earns victory through determination and skill instead of magical advantages. This grounded approach helps distinguish him from the gods, whose equipment symbolizes power rather than necessity. Zeus' costume stands in complete contrast to Perseus. His magnificent golden armor immediately establishes him as the supreme ruler of Olympus. Instead of resembling ordinary bronze armor, it appears almost supernatural, reflecting light with an intensity that suggests divine energy flowing through every surface. The armor combines classical Greek influences with fantasy design, creating something familiar yet unmistakably otherworldly. The intricate patterns covering Zeus' armor resemble flowing lightning and celestial symbols, reinforcing his connection to the heavens. His long robes add elegance and authority while maintaining the regal image expected of the king of the gods. Every aspect of his appearance communicates wisdom, power, and dignity. Even when standing completely still, Zeus dominates the frame because his costume transforms him into a figure worthy of worship. Hades receives one of the film's most memorable costume designs. While Zeus embodies light and order, Hades visually represents darkness and decay. His armor appears blackened, cracked, and almost fused directly onto his body. Rather than looking forged by human hands, it resembles something grown from shadow itself. Jagged edges, irregular textures, and burnt surfaces suggest centuries spent within the underworld. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Hades' appearance involves the visual effects integrated into his costume. Black smoke constantly escapes from beneath the armor, drifting around his body as though darkness itself has become part of his physical form. This effect blurs the boundary between costume design and visual effects, creating a villain who feels supernatural even before speaking. The result is one of the most visually recognizable interpretations of Hades ever presented in modern cinema. Io's costume reflects an entirely different design philosophy. As an immortal guide who has wandered the world for centuries, her clothing combines practicality with quiet elegance. Earth-toned fabrics, layered garments, and flowing robes allow her to move naturally through both wilderness and sacred locations. Unlike royal costumes that emphasize status, Io's clothing suggests wisdom, experience, and simplicity. Her appearance reinforces the idea that true knowledge requires neither wealth nor elaborate decoration. Princess Andromeda's wardrobe reflects her royal status while avoiding unnecessary extravagance. Her dresses incorporate flowing fabrics, elegant embroidery, and carefully selected jewelry appropriate for a princess. However, the designers intentionally restrained the level of ornamentation to maintain the film's grounded aesthetic. Even the royal family appears part of a civilization constantly threatened by war and divine punishment rather than living in luxurious comfort. The soldiers accompanying Perseus also receive considerable attention through costume design. Rather than dressing every warrior identically, the filmmakers introduced subtle variations in armor, helmets, shields, and clothing that suggest years of individual military service. Leather straps, worn metal surfaces, and repaired equipment communicate experience without requiring exposition. Their practical appearance makes the expedition feel like an authentic military force instead of actors wearing identical costumes. The Jinn possess some of the film's most original costume designs. Their weathered robes, masks, layered fabrics, and distinctive weapons immediately separate them from both Greek soldiers and Olympian gods. Their costumes incorporate influences from desert cultures while remaining intentionally mysterious. The result is a visual identity suggesting ancient knowledge and survival within one of the world's harshest environments. Creature design represents another major achievement of the production. Medusa underwent extensive conceptual development before her final appearance was approved. The filmmakers wanted her to retain traces of human beauty while becoming genuinely terrifying. Her face remains recognizable enough to evoke sympathy for the cursed woman she once was, while her snake-covered body and elongated movements establish her as something completely unnatural. The countless snakes replacing her hair required careful animation and detailed texturing to ensure each moved independently. Combined with subtle makeup references incorporated into the digital model, Medusa became both beautiful and horrifying simultaneously. This balance perfectly reflects the dual nature of the mythological character. The giant scorpions were designed with realism in mind despite their impossible size. The artists studied actual scorpions extensively, examining their anatomy, movement, claws, tails, and behavior before enlarging every feature dramatically. Their rough exoskeletons, segmented bodies, and powerful legs create the impression that these creatures could genuinely exist within this dangerous mythical world. The Kraken presented perhaps the greatest design challenge. Unlike Medusa or Pegasus, which possess relatively established appearances within popular culture, the filmmakers had greater creative freedom with the enormous sea monster. They ultimately chose an aquatic design featuring massive tentacles, armored skin, and colossal proportions that emphasized overwhelming physical power rather than elegance. Every detail focused on communicating scale, ensuring audiences immediately understood that no conventional army could hope to defeat such a creature. The set design throughout the film supports the costumes by creating environments that feel equally authentic. The fishing village where Perseus grows up appears simple and functional, consisting of wooden structures, fishing equipment, boats, and modest homes. Every object contributes to the impression of hard-working people surviving through cooperation and resilience. This peaceful setting becomes emotionally significant because it represents everything Perseus loses. Argos serves as the story's primary urban environment. The production designers combined historical Greek architectural influences with fantasy elements to create a city worthy of mythological storytelling. Massive staircases, towering columns, enormous statues, and monumental temples dominate the skyline. These structures communicate both the city's prosperity and its deep dependence upon the gods. Public spaces appear designed to inspire awe, reminding citizens of divine authority wherever they go. Mount Olympus presents a dramatic visual contrast to the human world. The sets feature polished stone, brilliant golden lighting, vast open spaces, and elegant architectural symmetry. Everything appears larger than life, reinforcing the perfection associated with divine existence. Even though many backgrounds were digitally extended, the physical sets provided actors with tangible environments that enhanced their performances. The underworld represents the opposite extreme. Dark stone, volcanic textures, endless shadows, and burning landscapes create an oppressive atmosphere reflecting Hades' domain. Instead of traditional medieval visions of hell, the production designers developed a more mythological interpretation where desolation itself becomes the defining visual characteristic. Perhaps the most memorable set is Medusa's temple. Broken statues, collapsed columns, narrow corridors, and ancient ruins create an environment filled with tension before the monster even appears. The temple feels abandoned for centuries, allowing nature and darkness to reclaim the once sacred structure. Every corner suggests hidden danger, making the setting almost as important as Medusa herself. Weapons and props also contribute significantly to the film's authenticity. Swords, shields, spears, bows, and armor all display signs of regular use rather than decorative craftsmanship. The filmmakers wanted audiences to believe these items had histories long before appearing on screen. Even magical objects maintain physical weight and realism despite their supernatural significance. Looking back, the costume and set design of Clash of the Titans remain among the film's greatest artistic achievements. Every visual element works together to create a world where mythology feels tangible, dangerous, and emotionally believable. Rather than relying solely on computer-generated imagery, the filmmakers built physical environments and crafted practical costumes that gave actors authentic spaces to inhabit. Combined with digital enhancements, These designs transformed ancient legends into a cinematic world that continues to impress audiences with its scale, atmosphere, and attention to detail. The screenplay of Clash of the Titans plays a crucial role in transforming one of the oldest stories in Greek mythology into a modern blockbuster adventure. Written by Travis Beacham, Phil Hay, and Matt Manfredi, the script takes the basic structure of the ancient Perseus legend while adapting it to suit contemporary audiences. Rather than attempting a direct retelling of the original myths, the writers focused on creating a fast-paced action narrative built around emotional conflict, heroic growth, and large-scale spectacle. This approach resulted in a screenplay that emphasized accessibility and entertainment while making significant changes to traditional mythology. One of the screenplay's greatest strengths is its simplicity. From the opening scenes, audiences quickly understand the central conflict. Humanity has begun turning against the gods, Hades seeks revenge against Zeus, Perseus loses his family and becomes determined to fight back, and the city of Argos faces destruction unless someone can stop the Kraken. These clear motivations allow viewers to follow the story easily, even if they have little or no knowledge of Greek mythology. This straightforward storytelling proved particularly important because the film was designed for a worldwide audience. Rather than relying on extensive mythological background or complicated political relationships among the gods, the screenplay presents conflicts in ways that anyone can understand. Revenge, family, sacrifice, courage, and personal identity are universal themes that require little explanation regardless of cultural background. The dialogue itself generally reflects this accessible approach. Characters rarely speak in highly poetic or theatrical language often associated with ancient myths. Instead, conversations are modern enough to remain understandable while still maintaining a sense of epic seriousness. The writers intentionally avoided making every line sound overly formal or Shakespearean, allowing audiences to connect more naturally with the characters. Perseus' dialogue illustrates this philosophy particularly well. Unlike legendary heroes who frequently deliver long inspirational speeches, Perseus often speaks briefly and directly. His words reflect his background as an ordinary fisherman rather than a prince or philosopher. He rarely tries to impress others with elaborate speeches, choosing instead to express his emotions honestly. This restrained style reinforces his identity as someone uncomfortable with the destiny others expect him to embrace. Throughout the film, Perseus' conversations gradually change as his confidence grows. Early in the story, much of his dialogue expresses confusion, anger, or disbelief. He questions the motives of the gods, rejects his divine heritage, and struggles to understand the role he is expected to play. As the journey continues, his words become calmer and more decisive. By the final act, he speaks like a leader who has earned the trust of those around him rather than someone still searching for purpose. The dialogue between Perseus and Zeus provides some of the screenplay's most emotionally significant moments. Their conversations revolve around conflicting ideas of family, destiny, and responsibility. Zeus speaks with calm authority, believing Perseus should naturally accept his place among the gods. Perseus responds with skepticism and emotional honesty, refusing to recognize a father who played no role in raising him. These exchanges reveal that the central conflict is not simply physical but deeply personal. Zeus cannot understand why Perseus rejects the gifts of Olympus, while Perseus cannot understand why divine power should matter more than human love. Although their conversations are relatively brief, they establish the emotional foundation for Perseus' eventual decision to remain among humanity. The screenplay also gives Hades memorable dialogue that reflects his bitterness without reducing him to a one-dimensional villain. Rather than speaking only in threats, Hades often expresses disappointment, resentment, and frustration. His words suggest that centuries of ruling the underworld have left him feeling isolated and forgotten by his fellow gods. Ralph Fiennes' performance elevates much of this dialogue through subtle vocal delivery. Even simple lines carry emotional weight because he communicates years of unresolved pain beneath the character's anger. This combination of script and performance allows audiences to understand Hades' motivations even while rejecting his methods. Liam Neeson brings similar authority to Zeus' dialogue. The screenplay frequently gives Zeus statements that sound almost philosophical, emphasizing order, balance, and responsibility rather than personal ambition. His calm, measured speech contrasts sharply with Hades' emotional intensity, reinforcing the differences between the two brothers through dialogue as well as visual design. Io serves an important narrative function through her conversations with Perseus. Much of the mythology and background information is delivered through her explanations, making her one of the screenplay's primary sources of exposition. Exposition can often feel artificial if characters simply explain information for the audience's benefit. In Clash of the Titans, however, the writers generally justify these explanations by establishing Io as someone who has observed humanity for centuries. Her dialogue also balances practical guidance with emotional encouragement. Instead of merely explaining mythology, she helps Perseus understand his own potential. These conversations contribute to his character development while preventing exposition from becoming purely informational. The marketing campaign for Clash of the Titans was one of Warner Bros.' biggest promotional efforts of 2010. The studio understood that it was relaunching a well-known fantasy property while also introducing the story to an entirely new generation. The campaign needed to appeal to longtime fans of the 1981 original, younger audiences unfamiliar with Greek mythology, action movie enthusiasts, and viewers looking for the next major visual spectacle after the enormous success of Avatar. To accomplish this, Warner Bros. Focused on emphasizing epic scale, legendary monsters, an all-star cast, and state-of-the-art visual effects. From the earliest announcements, the studio promoted the film as more than a simple remake. Instead of advertising it as a direct recreation of the 1981 classic, the campaign described it as a bold reimagining of one of mythology's greatest adventures. This distinction was important because it allowed audiences to expect a fresh interpretation while still recognizing the familiar title. Warner Bros. Wanted moviegoers to understand that this version would feature modern storytelling, larger action sequences, and visual effects impossible to achieve when the original film was made. One of the first promotional strategies involved highlighting the impressive cast. By 2010, Sam Worthington had become one of Hollywood's fastest rising stars following the extraordinary success of Avatar and Terminator Salvation. Promotional materials frequently placed Worthington at the center of posters and trailers, presenting him as the heroic face of the adventure. The campaign suggested that audiences who had recently watched him battle futuristic machines or explore the world of Pandora would now see him facing gods and monsters from Greek mythology. The supporting cast also became a major selling point. Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes were heavily featured throughout the advertising campaign. Their names appeared prominently on posters, television commercials, magazine advertisements, and online marketing materials. Both actors already possessed strong international recognition, and Warner Bros. Understood that audiences would immediately associate them with prestige, experience, and powerful performances. Television advertisements often emphasized dramatic moments involving Zeus and Hades. Liam Neeson's commanding presence as Zeus and Ralph Fiennes' terrifying appearance as Hades quickly became central elements of the campaign. Their confrontation suggested that the film would offer not only exciting action but also an epic conflict between powerful gods whose decisions shaped the fate of humanity. The theatrical trailers played perhaps the most important role in generating excitement. Rather than revealing the entire storyline, the trailers focused on showcasing the film's scale. They introduced Perseus' journey while rapidly presenting glimpses of giant scorpions, Medusa, Pegasus, enormous battles, collapsing cities, and finally the terrifying Kraken emerging from the sea. These carefully selected images created anticipation without revealing every major plot development. Music also played a significant role within the trailers. Powerful orchestral compositions accompanied fast-paced editing, creating an increasing sense of excitement as each preview progressed. The trailers built steadily toward the appearance of the Kraken, ending with spectacular visual moments designed to leave audiences eager for the full theatrical experience. Perhaps the single most memorable element of the promotional campaign became the line "Release the Kraken." Warner Bros. Recognized the dramatic impact of Liam Neeson's delivery and incorporated the phrase extensively into advertising materials. Television commercials often concluded with Zeus speaking the famous line immediately before showing the enormous sea monster rising from the ocean. This moment became the defining image associated with the film long before audiences entered theaters. As anticipation grew, "Release the Kraken" quickly spread beyond official advertising. Movie fans repeated the phrase online, entertainment websites referenced it in previews, and television programs discussed it while covering upcoming blockbuster releases. By the time the film premiered, the line had already become one of the campaign's most recognizable features. The film's posters were carefully designed to emphasize scale and mythology. One of the primary theatrical posters featured Perseus standing alone while holding his sword against an enormous mythical backdrop. The composition immediately communicated the classic image of a lone hero facing impossible odds. Other posters focused on Zeus, Hades, or the Kraken itself, each highlighting different aspects of the story while maintaining a consistent visual identity. Dark clouds, dramatic lighting, ancient architecture, and massive creatures dominated the poster artwork. Rather than using bright fantasy colors, the marketing reflected the film's grounded visual style through muted earth tones, storm-filled skies, and dramatic contrasts between light and darkness. These artistic choices helped distinguish Clash of the Titans from more colorful fantasy productions aimed primarily at younger children. International marketing adapted certain materials for different regions while preserving the core message. Since Greek mythology enjoys worldwide recognition, the campaign remained remarkably consistent across global markets. Regardless of language or country, advertisements emphasized legendary monsters, heroic battles, and spectacular visual effects. The universal nature of mythology allowed Warner Bros. To market the film effectively across Europe, Asia, North America, South America, and Australia with relatively few major changes. The studio also invested heavily in online promotion, reflecting the growing importance of digital marketing during the late 2000s. Official websites featured character biographies, downloadable wallpapers, trailers, production photographs, and interactive content introducing audiences to the various gods, monsters, and heroes. Fans could explore information about Perseus, Zeus, Hades, Medusa, Pegasus, and the Kraken before seeing the film. Social media was becoming increasingly influential during this period, and Warner Bros. Used platforms such as Facebook and YouTube to distribute trailers, behind-the-scenes featurettes, interviews with cast members, and promotional clips. While social media campaigns were still relatively simple compared to modern standards, Clash of the Titans benefited from audiences sharing trailers and discussing the impressive creature designs online. Behind-the-scenes promotional videos also helped generate excitement. These featurettes introduced viewers to the filmmaking process, showing concept artwork, costume creation, stunt rehearsals, and visual effects development. Interviews with Louis Leterrier, Sam Worthington, Liam Neeson, Ralph Fiennes, and other cast members emphasized the filmmaker's ambition to create an epic mythology adventure unlike anything audiences had previously experienced. The visual effects became one of the campaign's strongest promotional tools. Warner Bros. Understood that audiences wanted to see modern technology bring legendary monsters to life. Television spots frequently showcased Medusa's terrifying appearance, the giant scorpion battles, Pegasus soaring through the sky, and especially the colossal Kraken. Rather than hiding the creatures, the marketing embraced them as major attractions. The release strategy also benefited from excellent timing. The film premiered only a few months after Avatar had revolutionized audience interest in three-dimensional cinema. Recognizing this trend, Warner Bros. Decided to convert Clash of the Titans into 3D during post-production. The studio strongly promoted this version as an opportunity to experience Greek mythology with greater immersion and spectacle. Television commercials, posters, and theater advertisements frequently highlighted the 3D presentation. Premium ticket pricing and audience curiosity surrounding the relatively new format helped generate strong opening weekend attendance. Although the quality of the conversion later became controversial, its inclusion unquestionably attracted many viewers eager to experience another major three-dimensional blockbuster. Merchandising formed another important component of the promotional campaign. Action figures based on Perseus, Zeus, Hades, Medusa, and the Kraken became available alongside collectible statues, posters, clothing, and other licensed products. These items targeted younger audiences while allowing collectors to own representations of the film's distinctive creature designs. Several video game adaptations and related interactive experiences also accompanied the release. Although none achieved the popularity of major gaming franchises, they helped extend the movie's presence beyond theaters and introduced additional audiences to the world of Perseus and Greek mythology. Promotional partnerships with gaming publications further expanded awareness among action-oriented audiences. The cast participated extensively in interviews during the promotional tour. Sam Worthington discussed the physical training required for the role, while Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes spoke about portraying iconic mythological gods. Louis Leterrier frequently explained his desire to modernize the original film while respecting its legacy. These interviews appeared on television programs, entertainment news broadcasts, newspapers, magazines, and online publications around the world. One particularly effective aspect of the campaign involved emphasizing practical filmmaking alongside digital effects. Promotional featurettes showcased real filming locations, constructed sets, physical costumes, and extensive stunt work. This reassured audiences that the movie relied on more than computer-generated imagery, highlighting the craftsmanship behind the production. Following the film's release, audience discussion itself became part of the marketing. Positive reactions to the Medusa sequence, the Kraken, and the performances of Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes spread through word of mouth. At the same time, debates surrounding the 3D conversion kept the film in entertainment headlines for weeks after its premiere. While not all publicity was positive, it ensured that Clash of the Titans remained a major topic of conversation throughout its theatrical run. The film's strong worldwide box office ultimately confirmed that the promotional campaign had succeeded in generating enormous public interest. Despite mixed critical reviews, audiences responded to the promise of epic mythology, memorable monsters, and blockbuster action. Warner Bros. Achieved its primary objective of transforming an older fantasy property into a modern cinematic event capable of attracting both nostalgic fans and first-time viewers. Looking back, the marketing of Clash of the Titans represents an important example of blockbuster promotion during the early 2010s. It combined traditional advertising through posters, television commercials, and theatrical trailers with emerging digital strategies involving websites, online videos, and social media engagement. Most importantly, it successfully sold the film's central promise, an ancient myth brought to life through modern filmmaking technology on a scale that audiences had rarely experienced before. Even today, many people immediately associate the movie with its unforgettable advertising image of Zeus commanding the world to release the Kraken, proving just how effective the promotional campaign ultimately became. Clash of the Titans occupies a unique position within fantasy cinema because it exists at the intersection of several different traditions. It is simultaneously a remake of a beloved classic, an adaptation of ancient Greek mythology, and a modern Hollywood blockbuster. Because of this, the film invites comparison not only with the original 1981 version but also with other mythology-inspired films, fantasy epics, and even the work of its own director, Louis Leterrier. Examining these comparisons provides a deeper understanding of what makes the 2010 film distinctive, where it succeeds, and where it intentionally departs from both mythology and earlier cinematic interpretations. The most obvious comparison is with the original Clash of the Titans released in 1981. Directed by Desmond Davis and featuring visual effects by the legendary Ray Harryhausen, the original film became famous for its groundbreaking stop-motion animation. Harryhausen's handcrafted creatures, including Medusa, Pegasus, Bubo the mechanical owl, and the Kraken, represented the highest level of visual effects technology available at the time. Although modern audiences may notice the limitations of stop-motion animation, the artistry involved remains widely respected and continues to influence filmmakers today. The 2010 remake approaches the same story from an entirely different perspective. Rather than emphasizing fantasy charm and mythological wonder, Louis Leterrier sought realism, intensity, and large-scale action. Every creature was redesigned using computer-generated imagery, allowing for greater movement, size, and realism than stop-motion could achieve. The Kraken became vastly larger, the giant scorpions appeared more aggressive, and Medusa moved with frightening speed and fluidity impossible to create in 1981. These technological differences reflect changing audience expectations. Viewers in 1981 admired handcrafted effects because they represented the cutting edge of cinematic imagination. By 2010, audiences expected digital creatures capable of interacting seamlessly with live-action environments. The remake therefore focused less on showcasing animation techniques and more on convincing viewers that mythical monsters genuinely existed within the world of the film. The tone of the two films also differs significantly. The original possesses a sense of adventure and fairy-tale charm that remains appealing decades later. While dangerous moments certainly exist, the overall atmosphere is lighter and more whimsical. The remake, in contrast, embraces a darker, more serious approach. Its landscapes appear harsher, the violence more intense, and the gods more intimidating. This reflects broader trends in fantasy filmmaking during the late 2000s, when audiences increasingly favored grounded interpretations of legendary stories. Characterization also changes between the two versions. In the 1981 film, Perseus largely accepts his destiny as a heroic demigod. His journey follows the traditional structure of a mythological champion embracing divine guidance. In the remake, however, Perseus initially rejects both his heritage and the gods themselves. His emotional conflict revolves around identity, grief, and personal choice rather than simply fulfilling prophecy. This modern interpretation reflects contemporary storytelling, where reluctant heroes often resonate more strongly with audiences than characters who immediately accept greatness. One of the most noticeable omissions from the remake is Bubo, the mechanical owl. In the original film, Bubo serves as both comic relief and an important companion to Perseus. Fans of the earlier movie remembered the character fondly, making his absence in the remake particularly noticeable. Interestingly, the 2010 film briefly acknowledges Bubo through a short cameo, almost as a respectful tribute to the original, while making it clear that this version intended to follow a different creative direction. Another fascinating comparison involves the treatment of Greek mythology itself. Neither version follows the ancient myths exactly, but they alter the source material in different ways. The remake introduces significant changes to character relationships, motivations, and story structure. Io, for example, plays a much larger role than in traditional mythology, while Perseus' relationship with Zeus becomes one of the story's emotional foundations. Perhaps the most famous historical inaccuracy shared by both films involves the Kraken. In actual Greek mythology, Perseus rescues Andromeda from Cetus, a sea monster sent by Poseidon. The Kraken originates from Scandinavian folklore rather than Greek legend. However, because the 1981 film popularized the creature's inclusion, the remake continued using it. As a result, millions of viewers now associate the Kraken with Greek mythology despite its entirely different cultural origins. When compared with Troy, released in 2004, the differences become equally interesting. Troy deliberately minimizes supernatural elements, presenting the legendary conflict as historical drama rather than fantasy. Gods rarely appear directly, and mythical events receive realistic explanations. Clash of the Titans takes the opposite approach. Gods actively shape events, monsters exist physically, and supernatural powers influence nearly every aspect of the story. Both films explore ancient legends, but they represent opposite ends of the mythology spectrum. Gladiator provides another useful comparison despite being based on historical fiction rather than mythology. Both films feature heroes confronting overwhelming authority while seeking justice following personal tragedy. However, Gladiator focuses almost entirely on political power, human corruption, and historical realism. Clash of the Titans instead examines divine authority, destiny, and supernatural conflict. The emotional foundations share similarities, yet the worlds they inhabit differ dramatically. The influence of 300 can also be observed. Zack Snyder's adaptation introduced audiences to stylized historical fantasy featuring exaggerated heroism, dramatic visual compositions, and highly choreographed action. Although Clash of the Titans avoids Snyder's distinctive visual style, both films embrace larger-than-life interpretations of the ancient world. Massive armies, heroic sacrifices, and physically impossible battles characterize both productions, reflecting Hollywood's renewed fascination with antiquity during this period. Comparisons can also be made with the Percy Jackson series. While Percy Jackson adapts Greek mythology for younger audiences through contemporary settings and humor, Clash of the Titans treats mythology with greater seriousness. Both feature demigod heroes struggling with identity and parental relationships, but Perseus faces moral responsibilities associated with adulthood rather than the coming-of-age experiences central to Percy Jackson's story. Within Louis Leterrier's own career, Clash of the Titans represents a natural progression of themes explored in his earlier work. In The Transporter and The Incredible Hulk, Leterrier demonstrated a preference for energetic action sequences, dynamic camera movement, and protagonists confronting forces larger than themselves. Clash of the Titans expands these interests onto an epic mythological scale while maintaining his characteristic fast pacing and visually kinetic style. The film also shares similarities with modern superhero cinema. Perseus resembles many contemporary comic book heroes in that he possesses extraordinary abilities while questioning the responsibilities accompanying those powers. Like characters such as Superman or Thor, he struggles to balance extraordinary heritage with human compassion. However, unlike many superheroes who eventually embrace their powers completely, Perseus deliberately chooses to remain connected to humanity. Another interesting comparison involves the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Both films feature dangerous quests, diverse companions, mythical creatures, and heroes confronting impossible odds. Yet The Lord of the Rings places much greater emphasis on character relationships, political complexity, and world-building across multiple films. Clash of the Titans tells a more contained story, prioritizing momentum and accessibility over extensive mythology or intricate narrative detail. From a visual effects perspective, the remake reflects the technological evolution of fantasy filmmaking. The original relied on stop-motion animation, practical miniatures, and optical effects. By 2010, advances in computer-generated imagery allowed creatures to interact far more naturally with actors and environments. While some audiences continue preferring the charm of Harryhausen's handcrafted animation, others appreciate the realism made possible by modern technology. Both approaches represent the highest artistic achievements of their respective eras. The treatment of heroism also differs between generations of filmmaking. Older fantasy films often portrayed heroes as noble figures whose greatness seemed inevitable. Modern audiences frequently prefer flawed protagonists struggling with doubt, grief, and moral uncertainty. The remake reflects this shift by presenting Perseus as emotionally vulnerable rather than immediately confident. His victories feel earned through growth rather than simply granted by prophecy. Perhaps the greatest distinction between Clash of the Titans and many comparable fantasy films lies in its treatment of power. Unlike stories where heroes ultimately embrace greater supernatural abilities, Perseus consistently values humanity above divinity. His final decision to reject Olympus separates him from countless fantasy protagonists who seek higher status or unlimited power. The film suggests that compassion, humility, and personal choice matter more than divine privilege, making its central message surprisingly grounded despite the mythological setting. Looking back, Clash of the Titans stands as both a tribute to and a reinterpretation of ancient mythology. It honors the original film while embracing modern filmmaking technology, adapts timeless legends while reshaping them for contemporary audiences, and combines traditional heroic storytelling with modern themes of identity and free will. Although comparisons inevitably highlight differences in tone, style, and historical accuracy, they also demonstrate the remarkable flexibility of Greek mythology itself. Stories created over 2,000 years ago continue inspiring filmmakers because every generation discovers new ways to reinterpret timeless heroes, legendary monsters, and eternal questions about destiny, power, and what it truly means to become a hero.